Hi, I'm Kathy Thomas with the City of Las Vegas.
Hi, my name is Heather. I'm the CEO for the Las Vegas Rescue Mission, and
This is Compassionate Las Vegas, the podcast.
Hi everyone, my name is Aimee. I'm with Anytown Youth Council, and today we're talking about anti-homelessness, and for me, youth homelessness, and how people are unhoused and how that's unacceptable. I would just like to, open this podcast with asking our first question, which is, why does homelessness generate so much debate and confusion?
Yeah, that is the question I often ask when I'm in meetings where the debates and the confusion occur. Just like there are many causes of homelessness, there will be multiple solutions to ending homelessness. And the reason there is confusion and even debate is that different groups and different individuals want to approach addressing homelessness differently. Some in this conversation attribute homelessness to the actual person experiencing that homelessness. And so they want that person to figure it out, get it together, raise themselves by the bootstraps, so to speak. And there are others who understand that there are different systems at play, but they don't agree on which elements of those systems are the best place for us to interact to make a change. And so you have this continuum of folks who participate in the conversations, I think genuinely want to see homelessness ended, but can't agree on the causes and therefore don't agree on the solutions.
Kathi is always hitting it right on the head, you know. So there are so many factors in the solution, and maybe there shouldn't be. However, there are so many demographics within the homeless population in the encampments. There's like 5 demographics within that, and how someone has become homeless, you know, and the circumstances behind that. And I feel that there's a whole lot of effort being put into the triage factor of it all. What I do, you know, how we do that, but it's the after that I think is the key piece that I see the most. So I'm a believer that we shouldn't be pushing people out to the ends of any environment, to any city, in any state, anywhere, but bring them into the neighborhoods where appropriate, so that they have dignity and, you know, and they can afford to be in that area where there's trees and parks and all the things that normal families do or individuals. But that might not be that way for every single person that's experienced homelessness. That might not work for them. So I think long-term case management is a key factor, you know, to stay with people for quite a long time as things go really well. And if something goes wrong, then we're right there to help them navigate that issue and get to the other side of it, so that 8 ball doesn't get so big that it's no longer feasible to lift. There's a lot of collaboration everywhere. There's a lot of conversation everywhere. I'm more of an action person. And I think, you know, I can't speak for Kathi, but I sort of maybe there's just been, we're in meetings all the time, having a conversation all the time. And I think, you know, at this point it's just pick up and do something different. And it might not be popular, you know, or whatever the case is, but I think moving the needle forward, you know, is key in this thing. But yes, you're right. It causes tremendous debate.
So Heather, I noticed when you were talking about bringing homeless people into better neighborhoods, and you said where appropriate. Can you just elaborate on that? Sorry, just for clarification.
No, that's a wonderful question. I'm in long-term recovery. So for me, when I was first sober, me being going back into politics or whatever my life was then was not appropriate, because I did not have the skill set or wherewithal at that point to navigate it appropriately. I had some more work to do. So we look at all the demographics of homelessness. So if we're looking at a family per se they've had jobs, they've actually maintained a home, and some really horrible things happened, but they're capable of kind of stepping back into that world with some supportive care. That might not be the case for somebody who's coming from the tunnels, that is now experiencing many different things, and putting them into an environment that they're not ready for. It can cause, them to have recidivism factors, and it can be very overwhelming. So depending on the demographic, the circumstances, and I think that that's the key piece that I see the most, is really looking at every person without a broad brush label and assuming all these things, but really getting into them and saying, what were your dreams? That's kind of what we're doing here now. When was the last time you dreamt? When was the last time you thought, I want to be the best manager at 7-Eleven, or I want to be a banker or an astronaut? Whatever that dream is, we're trying to narrow in on that and throw some oxygen at it so that they have the capability of hope again and dream, and then we kind of work with that. So it's going to be really individualized as to what environment they're going to go in the beginning, because the last thing we want to do is set somebody up that it's so overwhelming for them that they can't make it happen.
That's beautifully said. Thank you so much for that. And so Kathi, I know I guess all of us are talking about possible or plausible solutions to homelessness, and that there's so many different ways of going about solving this problem. And so I guess what I'm asking is there any way, like, what solution would you think would be feasible for fixing the issue of homelessness? Like, is there something tangible? Like, for me, at least, I think education is one of the bigger things that we need to focus on to, get rid of homelessness.
I do think there are multiple things that are very tangible, and I want to echo what Heather said. You meet the individual where they are and ask them what the solution is for them and their family. In my work, we have a working model: hired, housed, and healthy. And that's based on some focus groups we did with adults experiencing homelessness. They said to us, if you help me get a job, I can figure the rest out by myself. So even though I knew they had some substance use issues, some mental health issues, and a number of other issues, I can't decide for them that the thing we're going to start addressing is your mental health history, because that's not what they said to me. What they said was, fully 50% said, if you help me get a job, I can figure the rest out myself. In the case of the adults that the city is serving, what they said was, help me get a job. And so in a lot of our programs, the individuals that we hire are guests of the courtyard. We hire people experiencing homelessness while they're still homeless. We don't require them to clean up. We don't require them to be housed. We only require that they show up on time and do the work they're assigned. And from there, all the other things begin to fall in place. So those are the tangible things that we think are important. By the way, that doesn't mean that the city doesn't subscribe to the theory of housing first. We do. I'm not a purist, though. So if the thing that I get you first isn't a place to live, if the thing that I get you first is the thing that you as a person experiencing homelessness requested, then that's where I will begin my journey with that person. I want to partner with that person. And it's their journey, by the way. My job is to support that to the extent that I can, or the programs we operate can. But the tangible thing you give somebody is actually the thing that they ask for.
Thank you. And so I want to pose the same question for Heather. Like, what is a possible solution, or even something stepping forward that we can do for people experiencing homelessness?
Well, there's not a one specific factor to that. There's such a dichotomy of things. So what, and I echo what Kathi says, and honestly, watching what goes on at the courtyard, and I'm very well integrated with that. When you give people dignity and you give them pride, you give them hope. And everybody, no matter what their circumstances are, most individuals, when you have action in your feet, you start doing dignified things, dignity and pride come back to you. And so what she's saying, with giving them a job, no matter what the situation is, that immediately right there takes them out of the trauma and the stress, or even the willful not wanting to do something. You want to do this, let's work for it together. And that brings pride, and that brings motivation. So as I look at, to go back to the first question on, because I've been thinking about that, and I am not necessarily, I speak my mind on these factors. So with the encampment issue, again, there's so many different demographics in that, right? So there are people in this community out there on the street corners. There is a handful of people that don't want help. They're service resistant. This is the world that they want to be in. It doesn't really fit into whatever society says, right? And so that causes a lot of dissonance with people. Get them off my property thing, right? The other side of that coin is that person is somebody. It's somebody's child, right? And in my house with all my adult kids, there was never a, let's get up, get moving. I will not push, pull, or drag you, but you will get up and you will move into that. And so we have to take that piece into the solution as well. You want these things. What are you willing to do that? Because here's what we're willing to do for you. With our recovery program, very much like the courtyard does, we put the men coming in on security right away, which seemingly might be a bit dangerous, or maybe not so safe. But what it does for the men specifically is it gives them pride, and it gives them something to sort of command in that area, and that in turn gets them moving forward. So again, I'll stand by the fact that there are so many different demographics in the homeless world, and it's not okay to paint, to put a broad brush to all of them in any way. And all the different people in there, like the people at the courtyard, when they get to go to work right away, it gives them that sense of purpose. And now you have something to walk with them home to, or pull them back. In the recovery world, boy, if I had a quarter for every woman that said, I don't like women. And I'm like, well, you don't like women because you can't manipulate them. And the men, I just need a job and I'll be fine. And that's not the case either, right? Because they're really not employable. So we kind of have to bring these things back down and meet them where they're at to get them where they need to be, as long as they're willing to take the walk with us.
Right. And that's beautifully said again. So with like possible, not solutions, but keeping it as accessible for people experiencing homelessness, I understand like a lot of things that are going on, such as hostile architecture, like anti-homeless architecture we're starting to see it a lot more. And so the definition is the design of buildings or public spaces in a way which discourages people from touching, climbing, or sitting on them with the intention of avoiding damage or use for a different purpose. And so I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but there's anti-homelessness architecture. You'll see, like, for example, at bus stops, there's benches, and there will be like bars to like separate each seat. But in reality, the purpose of that is to prevent people who are experiencing homelessness to sleep on those benches. Sometimes you'll see even spikes. So what are your perspectives like and thoughts on that?
So, and honestly, this is probably the second time in maybe 2 months that I've even heard the concept of anti-homeless architecture. Because one of the conversations I have with our planners and with Parks and Recs department staff as they're designing parks is that anything you design that attracts people. And it doesn't matter if their status or their current housing status is that they are unhoused. It will attract people. And this notion that, for me at least, this notion that a particular thing that's designed for people will repulse certain people. My observation is that, because there are a lot of bus benches that have those humps, those arms, whatever, to separate people. And I see homeless folks sleeping on them all the time. Like it isn't, if that's the intention of those, it's not effective, because the human body needs to sleep. And if that's the place you are when you have to stop and sleep, you will sleep on that. I've seen rock, xeriscape that people think will discourage unhoused people from setting up an encampment on rocks. No, they set up encampments on rocks. I'm much more interested in the reality than the theory of the thing. And I think Heather might have touched on this a little bit, is, you deal with people in their current reality. So I guess, in my opinion, the real question to me is more about the policies behind the design of public space. And if a public space is designed for people to congregate, then all people get to congregate there. If a public space is designed for people to move through it, then people get to move through it. If it's designed for concerts, then there should be concerts, COVID notwithstanding. So that means if benches are for sitting, people get to sit there. If sidewalks are for walking, people get to walk there. Whatever that public space in particular was designed or created to do, then people get to do it in that space. The challenge becomes when things happen in spaces that it wasn't designed to accommodate. So the natural outgrowth of this question would be, but hey, you've got the city, you've got this camping ordinance. Absolutely, because sidewalks are meant for walking, not camping. And so people experiencing homelessness should be able to use the public space like any other person uses the public space. But if the public space gets used in a way that impedes other people using that public space, now we have to have a conversation about what can we do about that, or what should we do about that. We should be advocating for homeless people to get housed, not for homeless people to be able to sleep on a sidewalk. Like, I never understand the dialogue that crops up around insisting that people get to sleep on a sidewalk. We should be insisting that people get to sleep in a place meant for human habitation. And so a lot of our advocacy energy gets used up advocating for something that we wouldn't want for ourselves. We don't want to have to sleep on the concrete. We want to sleep in a home. And so the conversation about anti-homeless architecture, can we have a policy conversation about getting people housed rather than whether or not there's a hump on the bench? Because the bench is for sitting.
Yeah, Kathi, your perspective on that, I really appreciate how you frame it and keep us big picture. Is there a place in this bigger conversation for incremental improvement? And Heather, since you work most closely with the individuals experiencing homelessness, maybe you could chime in first.
Thank you. Well, I mean, what Kathi said, it's a mic drop. It's like, that's exactly where I'm at. So I'll throw a little more controversy out there as well. So let's take an encampment, the one that was over here off Owens, that peninsula that seemingly had no owner there for a minute or whatever that was. Right. So I go by there to check in, and it's covered in fecal matter and garbage. Right. So what happens there? There's bathrooms there. There was sanitation put in. Everything was there. Any encampment area that I am a part of, and I do, as well as Kathi, and we'll sit with anybody anywhere, is constantly beyond not well kept in any direction, and zero want to do it. Right. So I was over there around Smith's the other day, right? And then I had to run up to Summerlin for a meeting. And what I see is arrogance in an affluent area as well as arrogance in a low income area. It's almost the same. And the fact that I'll park where I want, I'll do what I want, I'll throw this where I want, and that's just the way it is, right? So we go back down to what human conditions and manners are. And in these encampment areas, just as much as I do not want to have a label put on me, know me first before you label me, that's how I'm going to look at every individual. We have children here. Kathy's, camp down there, it's constantly busy and it's massive, right? There's children, even if they're not staying there, walking around at times. So now we have people exposing themselves. We have people defecating on the sidewalk. It's a CDC issue. It's a complete hazmat problem. So there's a lot of factors to this. The service resistant, and this is where the societal factors come into play, right? If a child, family, generational wealth was in any way raised to live off the government, and that was just the impetus put behind it, then now we have to kind of unwind something that's been a learned behavior for a very long time. The other side of that is the benefit issues. So the women that I worked with in human trafficking, that's a hard mind to turn. It just is a rough one. But they get that job at the Dollar Tree, right? They're making beyond or below minimum wage, but they are doing the next right thing. They're not taking the fast, easy way out. Even if it's damaging, they're still going to do that. They start making money, they get a 10-cent raise, and now their benefits are slashed. And so basically what we're telling them is, if you want to excel in your life, you're not going to be able to feed your kid halfway through the month, or maybe your Medicaid changes and stuff. So there are some fractures in that. There's been a lot of help in that in the last few years, for sure. It's getting looked at, but there's a lot of those things. I can't make anybody do anything they don't want to do, nor do I have a desire to do that. So when we have the service resistant population, right? There are people that are on the benches and people on the sidewalks and stuff. All that time though, I probably have 15 beds open. And we patrol the area. We talk to people. I keep stats on, what was the engagement factor? Where are they today? And the goal is to befriend and give them trust enough so that maybe they'll want to do it. And those are the people that will have trauma associated with help. The system failed them somewhere along the line and there's zero trust in any part of it. So there's that piece. Then you have the piece too of the willfulness. It's a public street, I'll do what I want. Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't get to do what I want. I would be arrested by now. And then they use that. There's a difference between being a victim and being victimized. They're two very distinct terms. And if we roll with the victim aspect of life, well, hi, my name is Heather. Here's all these horrible things that happened to me. I'm gonna well say it's nice to meet you. This we can deal with later. Where are we today? And so there's a victimization as well as running a victim label. But again, that's not every single person on the street. But those are the different demographics we're dealing with.
Yeah, I think, Will, your question about, are there some interim things that can happen? And I believe the answer to that is always yes. There is not a single magic silver bullet that will fix everything. And there are some interim things that we can do. There is some kind of heuristics that people use in shortcut things that people use when they're having this legal conversation. They say, sure, you have free speech, but you cannot yell fire in a crowded theater, right? You've heard that before. They say, sure, you have liberty, but your liberty to swing your arms ends at the tip of my nose, right? What those two kinds of ideas are suggesting that freedom and liberty come with responsibility and constraints. And so I really see some of the interim measures that some so-called advocates put forth as swinging their arms and hitting the tip of somebody else's nose. When we have encampments set up adjacent to communities without engaging that community on how to support our unhoused neighbors, then we're swinging our arms and touching the tips of someone else's nose. This isn't about NIMBYism. So often people get accused, back to those labels, I think Heather was saying, don't label me until you know me. And so if a neighborhood says, hey, we don't want that, everyone says, you're bad for not wanting this. That's NIMBYism. But what they don't want is some of what Heather was describing, when in one case there were clothes on a clothesline and people went and took the clothes. They didn't ask, hey, I need some clean clothes. Have you got some? They just took them off the clothesline. And the senior citizens who lived in the home were petrified. But legally they were robbed. Is that okay? I always feel like we're pitting one group of low-income individuals against another group of low-income individuals and not trying to find a place where both of those communities get what they need. And the places where the encampments spring up, often in those neighborhoods, folks say, you wouldn't let this happen in Summerlin. You wouldn't let this happen in more affluent neighborhoods. And government has to respond to all of its constituents. So the interim measures, like the courtyard, for example, where it's not intended to be permanent by any means. It's intended to be a place where you can be safe. You can come with your pets. You can bring all of your personal belongings. We'll help you store them. You can wash and get cleaned up. You can have an address of record to receive your mail or apply for jobs. You can get connected with your family members. You can do all those things. It's really difficult to do when you're sleeping rough on the street. And if you choose to stay overnight, you'll be safe. Nobody's going to rob you or attack you. And we shouldn't underestimate that. Like 2 years ago, there was literally a man beating homeless people in their sleeping bags, beating them to death with a lead pipe. Thankfully, he got arrested. Another kind of interim step that we would love to see happen is that we do have publicly owned empty buildings that we could repurpose for housing. I believe the shelters like Rescue Mission and Salvation Army and Catholic Charities are interim steps. That's not where it ends, but that's a place for it to begin. And so if that's a right interim step, we should offer that to people. And we want that to be part of the intervention as we move along the continuum. Yes, there are lots more that we could do. And I really think we should be looking at taking these empty buildings that are publicly owned, right? Not being used for anything, and convert those into housing. That, again, another step. So you sort of move wherever you need to move, whatever's in your best interest, as decided by you, right? The person experiencing homelessness can fully decide, hey, I don't want to come to the courtyard, or I don't want to go to the rescue mission. And that's okay. They should be able to decide what service they use. We just need more of those services so they have better choices, because it's not a choice to poop on the corner. as Heather was indicating.
You've given us a lot, and Heather, you gave us a lot as well. And I want to make space for Aimee just to share any thoughts that have come because of this. But one thing really stood out to me that I hope we have in our last few minutes a chance to address, which is solutions have been identified. You've given us a very clear path to eradicating homelessness. You really have done that. But my question is, why aren't we doing it?
My comments are actually aligned with what Will is trying to get across here. I guess from the perspective of someone who is of the youth advocacy groups, we just like to see people being held accountable for not doing what they claim, I guess. And so I noticed, Heather, you were talking about how, people might not want help because of trauma, because the system has or may have failed them in the past. And so that's what I'm asking. At what point can we say, you need to do what you need to do? And so with that in mind, I would like to kind of move that into when COVID started, there was a big thing going on with the Las Vegas homeless population where they would put dividing lines or in a parking lot for homeless to stay. And so I would kind of like to touch on that as to as Kathi was saying, we should provide them with opportunities and provide them with housing. Where in the solution of giving homeless people the opportunity of having housing does the parking lot kind of lead into? I understand that it was also part of the COVID spacing as well.
So I'll respond to that because that was literally my department doing that. We had one of our traditional shelter partners who had an individual that popped positive for COVID-19. And because there really wasn't any plan in place for what to do with congregate shelters when that happened, the decision that particular provider made at the time was to close the entire shelter, which meant 500 adult males had no place to be at night. None of our other traditional partners had the capacity to absorb 500 adult males. And where were those men going to go?
Heather, could you have absorbed 500 adult males at your facility?
No. So, and Aimee, I completely, utterly respect what you're saying. I'm a commissioner for the Nevada Women's Commission too, and I've been watching Kathi for a long time, and we might not always agree, and I think but I have a mad respect for her, and we don't disagree, and that's the way it works, right? That's how we problem solve ultimately, is through those things, and I will defend that a little bit in this case. So this is an unwritten crisis, right? Polio, long-term crisis, flu, and Shigella, everything, right? Ebola. So this is an unwritten crisis. We are writing it every day that we're in it. And so as a commissioner, I put my bulletproof vest on a lot when I speak, because, and that's just, the deal, everybody has an opinion about a lot of things and they have every right to have them. But when you're in the thick of it, in the thick of it, and we did not know what COVID was at that time. It was scary and unknown. We packed the house. We pulled in almost 300 people here, and we created a commune, right? And then we had to, then of course we had the COVID orders coming through on what you can't do with bedding, right? And we can't have people in, out, upside down because we don't know what we're dealing with. And that puts all these people that are on the streets who are supposed to be in home quarantine like everybody else, except essential workers. Where does that put them? So as unpalatable as that might have been, it certainly in no way was ever a demeaning factor. at all. It was I believe it was a response to immediate crisis need right now. And that's kind of the thing. And Aimee, I'm excited for you in your future. I really am, because moving forward with actionable things and completely well-stated questions puts me and in a position that I can answer you with my own outspoken ways. And I'm really tempered here right now. But, you know, I do have to say that in that crisis, when that happened, I mean, we all down here, Catholic Charities, Salvation Army, Shade Tree, the city, we all immediately got on the phone and we talked at least a couple times a week as a group. Who has what do you need? How do we make this happen? Who's got an outbreak? And we just threaded together. And I think in the offset of all this thing, that was one of the best things that could have happened. And I believe wholeheartedly that's where the city was at with this thing.
Thank you so much for that. And Kathi, I appreciate you allowing me to interject, because what I just wanted to highlight is that this, from the outside world, from people that are just looking, it may appear one way. But we have now the city of Las Vegas saying, and an active partner, a community service provider, saying this is what happened, why it happened, and no, it wasn't perfect, but it's what we had to do in the moment. So thank you both for bringing that to light. Aimee, back to you.
Yeah, I would just like to add on to what you're saying, Will. Like, I think that although it hadn't been like the most perfect solution, or it just had been the quickest way to get something done. Like, I would just like to point out, like, although like we all may not have the same not like mindset, but although we do have our opposing views sometimes, we aren't too far apart, and that the unity between these different perspectives gives a lot of insight as to what we could achieve, I guess.
It's so well said, Aimee. I have often said that we don't have disagreement on the big ideas, right? We believe that humans deserve housing. I think we all agree on that. We believe that as a community, we have the ability to feed the hungry. We all believe that. I do believe we share a commitment to human dignity. I really believe that. And so what I ask people to do is just, write your agenda down. Like, you might have 10 things on your agenda and I'll have 10 things on my agenda. But if we can find the 2 or 3 things that we agree upon, then we'll work on those 2 or 3 things together. So I think, Aimee, you hit it right on the head, that we may have a different perspective based on where we stand, right? Because I'm standing over here on this side of the issue as a government employee, and I have constituents that include unhoused communities and the business community and youth serving communities and elderly serving communities, and right, the rich, the poor, the well-educated, the uneducated. All of those are constituents of the city, which means, and in my department, community services, I have to serve the entire community. And often members of the community will have conflicting and competing priorities, and I still have to serve all members of the community. For many of our community partners, their focus is on a part of that community. For many of our advocacy groups, their focus is on maybe even a more defined part of that community. And it doesn't change the fact that government has to serve all of its constituents. So sometimes we look like we are having conflict when we're not. We're not in disagreement, but as government, I have to serve every constituent of the city. And so it takes us longer. There was a question you posed, Will, why aren't we doing the things we know will work? Part of the reason it takes a long time to get there when government's involved. Hi, my name is Kathi. I'm a bureaucrat, right? I have to own that. It takes a long time to move the levers of government, to untie the purse strings so that financial resources flow, to facilitate the conversation so elected officials at the state, city, county level agree. And, oh yeah, let's throw in the public entities like the railroad, the power company, right? Specifically when we're talking about encampments, because a lot of those encampments spring up in this never land that isn't the city or the county, it's the railroads or it's the power companies right of way. And they've got their own boards and commissions. And so sometimes we are not doing what we all know needs to be done, is because these institutions are big and calcified and it takes a long time for them to move. I can assure you there's movement happening, but it won't happen as quickly, I think, as any of us want it to happen, and certainly as quickly as people living in poverty need it to happen.
I would just like to give Heather a last few words before we close it up, because I know we haven't heard from Heather yet on this real quick.
Boy, Aimee, I'll tell you what. You are a very actionable young lady. Politics is a chessboard, my girl. It's a chessboard. Some of us have some skill sets that are very good at that. I do. It doesn't always come out well, but it's very calculated. It is what it is, right? I mean, so I don't move a chessboard around just because, right? My title only does one thing for me. I need to drop it when I need to move something. And that works. Other than that, I'm Heather, an alcoholic and a mother, right? Who's got a chance at a second life. But I've been put in this path to play this board a little bit. So I do it wisely and I do it carefully. But the one thing I think that I see the most of is the fight. When people are sitting back and saying, clearly there's a problem, which we know, how come no one's doing anything, right? And then there's an immediate defensive reaction. And now they're on City Hall screaming, but sometimes I don't know that they know what they're fighting for anymore. Sometimes I don't know if they're fighting to fight or if they really want to drive something. Because if you really want to drive something, then you got to lean into it. You got to lean into it and you got to be part of the solution in the conversation. Because the first thing that's going to happen when people feel like they're being attacked, or any entity, they're going to put that wall up. Because there's so much behind that people don't know. And so I think in a bureaucratic level, and I don't know if this will ever happen, right? But to kind of clean up the rhetoric a little bit, bullet pointed on one sheet, this is what we're doing, this is what this looks like, and we don't know the answer. But we're working toward that solution. So you can have a voice, use it wisely, be very direct in what you're saying. My staff, anybody will come to me, my children, and they're like, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't want to know about that. I want to know this, this, and this, and then this we can fold in later. And so, I think going forward in advocacy is going forward with respect and advocacy. Again, acceptance doesn't require that we like it, but it requires that we accept it so that we can all be part of the solution going forward. And if we want people to listen to us, then we have to be kind and understanding in how we're stating it. And know this, I'm a Band-Aid ripper. I have zero filter. I'm very well aware of who I am. And I tell people, like when I got the call this morning, I don't know that you want me on there. Because I don't know that I cannot say what I really feel to say. So we have to be careful in what we do, but you have to have conviction in it and not be willing to run away if it doesn't go your way. It's a big problem. This is a big ball of yarn that's never going to be unwound completely. But what I can say is here in the city, and certainly with all the nonprofits, everybody's really moving forward.
Well, that was beautifully said. And thank you both for coming on here and having this conversation and having this open dialogue. I would like to thank Will for having me here. This was a great platform for me to be on, since I'm a younger person, 18 years old. But thank you so much for this opportunity to just have this conversation and, bridge these connections.
Wonderful. And Aimee, thank you for navigating this so beautifully, so compassionately. Heather, Kathi, you both are true gems for our city. Thank you for your service, for the work that you have dedicated your lives to. I know it's not easy, and I think our audience is hearing how complex this really, really is. And so hopefully this moves the ball forward and gains positive energy towards the solutions that we've talked about, and a change for our city, more compassionate Las Vegas. So I want to thank the audience for listening and engaging in this conversation as well. As always, remember, you are not just a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop, and what you do does matter.
Coming up on Compassionate Las Vegas, the podcast.
What we're saying is, well, here's a concept. Here are some practices. Try it out. How's it working out for you? Is it working out for you better to feel like I'm a broken person and there's something wrong with me? Or is it better to think of myself as a human being just like everybody else? And as you said, people are peopling, right? So sometimes I'm just peopling every day, right? And sometimes that means I make mistakes. Sometimes that means I distort reality and don't recognize that I distort reality. Sometimes it means I do wonderful, beautiful things.